Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is August the 12th, 2024. It has been 3,850 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 172 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 170 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 7 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened over the weekend. You will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. There is a link in the podcast description. There are a lot of map updates today. I'm told I have a lot of new listeners since Ukraine invaded Russia. Hello! I deeply appreciate your trust and support. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south, and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, Iron House team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission: the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. Our assessment that there is a high risk of additional incidents of Russia intentionally targeting civilians in Ukraine due to the ongoing Kursk offensive was regrettably accurate. We maintain that Russia will continue attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure. 2. Although Ukraine's operational and strategic objectives in the Kursk Oblast are still unclear, we maintain that Kyiv intends to defend captured territory and continue to advance into Russia. 3. At this time, we maintain that Ukrainian forces do not have enough resources to defend Toretsk and New York and the approaches to Pokrovsk and Selidove, and the forces in Kursk are insufficient to change that outcome. 4. At this time, we maintain that Russia will achieve the operational goal of capturing Toretsk and New York in 2024, and we further assess that for Ukrainian forces an extended battle in an urban environment is ill-advised. 5. Despite the battlefield situation, Russian losses of armor, mobility, and personnel continue at an unsustainable level. 6. The Russian economy is weaker than reported. 7. Persistent delays in the delivery of promised military hardware, munitions, and funding continue to prevent the Ukrainian armed forces from reaching their full combat potential. 8. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. 9. We maintain that the policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States, and to a small extent Germany, is a failure and has proven to be ill-conceived. 10. We assess that the United States, Germany, and the leadership of the NATO alliance are shifting their policies on escalation after Moscow's muted response to Ukraine's Kursk offensive. 11. Russia will continue to commit increasingly worse violations of international humanitarian law until international watchdogs and Ukraine's allies take a unified and firm stance. 12. We maintain that Russia will restart sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure by October, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. 13. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear power plants. 14. We assess the fire at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant poses no safety risk and will not impact current plant operations. I didn't want to start today's podcast with Russian attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, but when Russia loses on the battlefield, it's Ukrainian civilians that pay the price. On Friday afternoon, the VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, attacked a hypermarket filled with shoppers in Kostiantynivka with a Kh-38 air-to-surface tactical missile, causing a fire that consumed the building and collapsing part of the crowded market. 14 civilians were killed, including 3 children, and another 44 wounded.
Не в больнице, не едем о Насте! А мне Настя нужна!
That's a woman who was begging reporters from the United States state media agency Radio Liberty for help. She said, quote, "Not in the hospital. Nastya is nowhere to be seen. I need Nastya." We don't know what happened to Nastya. On Saturday and Sunday, Russian attacks targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure killed at least 13 and wounded 50. And Russia launched 84 Shahed-136 one-way drones, with 80 shot down. On Saturday night, Russia attacked the Kyiv region with North Korean KN-23 short-range ballistic missiles. A 35-year-old father and his 4-year-old son were killed in the attack. In the Brovary district, rocket debris landed in a residential area, killing 2 and wounding 3. One of the KN-23 SRBMs failed in flight near Mykolaiv, crashing in an open area. According to the United Nations, July was the deadliest month for Ukrainian civilians since October 2022, when Russia first started using Shahed one-way drones in its campaign to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure. 219 civilians were confirmed killed, and another 1,019 were wounded. This was the 5th straight month of increased civilian casualties due to Russian attacks. Here is today's action report summary. On Saturday and Sunday, Russia carried out 238 discrete assaults in Ukraine, including 124 on Sunday. Through August the 11th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks dropped to 113, down 29% from the July the 4th peak, the lowest 7-day average since June the 16th. One of our readers asked about the number of Ukrainian attacks in Russia. The Russian Ministry of Defense does not report on the number of attacks in Russia. Including Friday, Russia only carried out 328 attacks, an over 50% reduction from last weekend. After the sharp decline that started on August the 7th, the operational tempo did increase on Sunday. A quick footnote. Our analysts updated the table of Russian versus Ukrainian heavy equipment losses using the information from the Oryx database. Subscribers to our Patreon get more, and you can find out how to access our almost daily situation reports in the podcast description. Let's go into the details of what happened on the battlefield. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in the northeastern part of Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. Before Friday, in the Kursk Oblast, we just had one operational area. Now we have 3. At the end of Day 6 of the Kursk offensive, Ukraine controls 613 square kilometers of Russia. Another 288 square kilometers are Russian claimed as under Ukrainian control or in the grey area. The entire area is 901 square kilometers. The breach is 63.6 kilometers wide, and Ukrainian forces have advanced up to 28 kilometers in depth. In the Tetkino area, Russian sources claimed their border settlement was heavily shelled, with cellular towers and communications infrastructure targeted. Russian sources also claimed, without evidence, that Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance units, also known as DRG, entered the border settlement of Slobodka-Ivanovka. On Saturday, a Russian Tu-S-43 Malva 152mm self-propelled howitzer, or SPG, was destroyed near Kalinina, And on Sunday, Ukraine attacked the bridge over the same river in Glushkova, causing non-structural damage. The road is the main Russian ground line of communication, GLOC supply line, from Rylsk to Tetkino. The activity suggests Ukraine is setting conditions for further action in this region. In the Korenevo area of operation, ORIO, Ukrainian forces are visually confirmed 6 kilometers from Korenevo, advancing from the south and the east. Civilians continued to evacuate the Korenevsky district, some without aid from the Russian government, even leaving the area in small boats. On Saturday, Russian civilians who evacuated from the Korenevo area told Russian propagandists with Ridovka that Ukrainian forces control Snagost and Krasnooktyabrskaya. They also made unsubstantiated claims that Polish soldiers were shooting into homes, but admitted there were no civilian casualties. Quick sidebar. Russians frequently claim they hear Polish speakers due to the misconception that Ukrainian and Russian are almost identical languages. While there are many common words, the difference is significantly larger. For Russians who did not learn or were exposed to Ukrainian, it sounds like a very heavy accented Polish. Well, how Russians imagine the Polish language must sound. Russian mercenary mail blogger Rybar continues to report that Snagost is occupied, while two majors reported it was cleared. We have left the map unchanged. Multiple Russian sources claim that Ukraine captured the border village of Gordievka. A geolocated video showed a Ukrainian heavy drone dropping multiple bombs on the Russian border checkpoint in the settlement. And we have moderate confidence that Ukraine released a video showing infantry mobility vehicles crossing the border after the attack. We link to the videos I've mentioned in the sitrep. You can find more information in the podcast description. On the southern outskirts of Olgovka, Russian forces attacked a Ukrainian armored group with cluster munitions. The video ended before providing a battle damage assessment, or BDA, but the vehicles appeared to have been hit. Russian forces counterattacked at Kremenная, destroying a Ukrainian infantry mobility vehicle and killing the squad. Chechen forces filmed themselves taking anti-tank weapons and ammunition from the vehicle. Northeast of Korenevo, Russian forces have repeatedly attacked Ukrainian troops near Semyonovka, 28 kilometers from the border. Russian sources released several videos showing bombings by the VKS without BDA. A second video showed a Ukrainian tank destroyed by a one-way drone. We continue to code the area as Russian claimed, despite the Ukrainian presence and ongoing fighting. We are unsure which road Ukrainian forces are using to reach the area. In the Sudzha AO, fighting was ongoing in Cherkasskaya Porechная, where Ukrainian forces advanced into the settlement with a significant force. Russian mercenary mail blogger Semyon Three-Toed Pegov of War Gonzo was south of Levshina at a B-21 Grad rocket MLRS. Based on the new intelligence, we pulled back the Russian-claimed Ukrainian advance to Shagarovo to Bolshoye Soldatskaya. There was conflicting information about the situation in Martinovka. Yesterday, Russian sources claimed the settlement was captured by Ukraine, counterattacked, and then fighting restarted. Russian forces, either Chechen Akhmat or elements of the 810th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade, were operating in the eastern part of the settlement. 6 kilometers north of Sudzha, Ukrainian forces were visually confirmed in Kazachya Loknya. In Rubanshina, Ukrainian tanks moved freely towards Sudzha with the bodies of Russian soldiers in the street. Ukrainian soldiers also continued to operate freely in the western part of Sudzha. In breaking news, we geolocated Ukrainian forces freely operating in eastern Sudzha at the MiG-29 statue and the roundabout between First Knyazhy and Martinovka. The troops were traveling south in the direction of Mirny, which we assessed on August the 9th as being under Ukrainian control. The roads in the area had been demined, with many destroyed civilian vehicles on the side of the road and damaged buildings past the MiG-29. Despite Russian claims, Sudzha is under Ukrainian control. Ukrainian forces have captured numerous pieces of abandoned Russian equipment, including 2 T-62 medium-duty tanks, a T-72 main battle tank, also known as an MBT, and a D-30 122mm Taut howitzer. In Goncharovka, Ukrainian forces captured a T-80 BVM MBT that had a full load of ammunition and fuel. The tank was seen in another video in May being delivered to Russian troops. In our assessment, the capture could be significant for military intelligence to identify parts that are being purchased despite sanctions. Southeast of Sudzha, Ukrainian forces occupied Makhnovka after Russian forces retreated without a fight. South of Sudzha, Ukrainian forces were visually confirmed in Aleshnya, near Milovoy, and in Guyevo, where the Ukrainian flag was raised. The multiple geolocations confirmed Rybar's August 7th report that Russian troops had withdrawn east of the Psel River. Multiple Russian sources claimed that Ukrainian forces occupied Plekhovo, which we coded as under Ukrainian control. Further south, Russian sources claimed without evidence that Ukraine occupied Kucherov, Milaevka, and Gaptarovka. The head of the Belovsky district of the Kursk region, Nikolai Volobuyev, said that Ukrainian DRG units reached Girye and Belaya but had been repulsed. Ukrainian forces have captured hundreds of Russian soldiers, the largest number of POWs we've seen since Russia expanded its war of aggression in February 2022. Ukraine was using drones with speakers, calling for Russian troops to surrender and providing instructions on how. Up to 2 platoons of Chechen Akhmat troops were captured and awaiting transit to Ukraine, and another photo showed POWs packed into a basement awaiting transfer. We linked to 8 different videos of Russian troops surrendering. A woman who works at a Kursk hospital said that Russian medics were, quote, transporting the wounded in droves, the killed in droves. All the cars and KAMAZ trucks are filled with corpses and the wounded without limbs. It's just awful, unquote. In one hospital, Russian soldiers are being treated in triage rooms and waiting areas. Civilians in areas far from the fighting report that police, firefighters, medics, and local Russian administrators have left. In Korenevo and Lvov areas, some residents are reluctant to evacuate due to reported looting by Russian civilians. One woman said, quote, "Stores are being looted. There is a collapse in Korenevo. Magnit has just been robbed. No water, no gas, no light. There was no organized evacuation, and if there was any, why haven't we in Lobanovka?" South of the Kursk nuclear power plant, Russia has started building static defenses south of the E-38 highway from Druzhnaya to Cheremoshny. On Friday, Russian officials restricted access to KNPP, and construction on Reactor 2 was suspended. Russian oppositional news agency Important Stories reported that the security forces that had been withdrawn from the plant on August 7th had been returned with additional troops. Plant operator Rosatom reportedly advised employees with children to go on unpaid leave and evacuate the area. Moscow appears to be convinced that KNPP is one of Ukraine's military objectives. You may have heard that 2 operating reactors at the KNPP are RBMK-1000s, built in 1984 and 1985, and share the same design as reactors 1 through 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. That is true. After the Chernobyl disaster, both reactors were allegedly retrofitted with modifications to prevent a similar disaster, and they are slated to be decommissioned in 2030. On Saturday, residents of the district were advised to evacuate, with Volobuev calling the situation, quote, tense. On the 10th of August, the Kursk military airfield was attacked by up to 12 Ukrainian missiles. One was intercepted over Kursk.
Пизда, вообще очко ебаное. Да ну нахуй. Тихо. Да ну нахуй. Пизда.
The intact warhead landed in a commercial and residential area, damaging apartment buildings. Russia claimed 15 people were injured. Yesterday morning, residents found the booster sections of Pantsir anti-aircraft rockets in the city. There were no indications that the airbase was hit. Earlier on Saturday, a Ukrainian drone or missile struck Kursk, blowing out windows at nearby buildings. A large industrial paint facility reportedly used by Chechen troops as a base was hit. Chechens accused Ukraine of using a 155mm chemical weapons artillery shell armed with chlorine gas. Even local officials dismissed the claim, reporting that chemicals from the paint facility likely sickened the Chechens. In response to the ongoing Ukrainian offensive, the Kremlin announced that the counter-terrorism regime was being activated in the Bryansk and Belgorod oblasts, in addition to the Kursk oblast, quote, due to an increase in the level of sabotage and terrorist threats from Ukraine. The KGB of Belarus issued a similar declaration.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
In other news, it appears we may need to start a Belgorod Oblast of Russia section. In the Golovchino AO, Ukrainian forces withdrew from Paros after a brief border incursion on Friday. Russian sources claimed that Ukrainian DRGs entered Kolotilovka and Bezymena. At the latter, a Ukrainian BTR, that's an armored personnel carrier, was destroyed at the international border. In breaking news, Belgorod Oblast Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov announced that power had been knocked out in the Graivoronsky district, while not stating the reason. A few hours later, Gladkov said in a video, quote, "We have an alarming morning, enemy activity on the border of Krasnoyarushsky district. In order to protect the lives and health of our residents, we are starting to move people who live in Krasnoyarushsky district to safer places. The process of coordinating the evacuation of people is currently underway on the ground. We have already sent the transport." The region is mostly rural and borders an area of the Kursk Oblast where Russian sources have reported fighting and Ukrainian advances. It's day 901 of Russia's, what did they call it, special military operation, and everything is going to plan. Ukraine is retreating, but in the wrong direction. Or is it the right direction? I guess it's a matter of perspective. Let's not forget about my home. Here is what happened in Ukraine, starting in the Kharkiv Oblast. In the Liptsy-Vovchansk AO, fighting continued in Vovchansk and the area of Tykhe with no significant changes to the situation. There are multiple reports from Russian and Ukrainian sources that Russian troops are being withdrawn from occupied Kharkiv Oblast and transferred to the Kursk Oblast. In the Kupiansk AO, Russian forces reportedly advanced into Tabaivka. Russian attempts to advance in the direction of Sinkivka towards Glushkivka from occupied Peshchane and the last parts of Berestove from the north were repulsed. In the Luhansk Oblast AO, Russian forces broke through Ukrainian defenses on the western edge of Novoselivsk and made a localized advance in the direction of Krugliakivka. west of Kremenna, Russian forces continued their attacks on the eastern edge of Makiivka and in the directions of Nevske and Novosadove with no change in the situation. Fighting also continued in the eastern part of the Serebryansky forest. Now let's talk about the Donbas and the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Siverskaya, Russian forces attacked Bilogorivka from the east and southeast, in the direction of Verkhnyokamyanske from Zolotarivka, from western Spirne, and towards Ivanodaryevka and Vyemka. There was no change in the situation. In the Konstantinivka, Ukrainian forces maintained their defensive lines on the western edges of Kalinivka, the canal district of Chasiv Yar, and the forested areas west of Ivanivska. Russian forces continued to make gains in the Turецк-New York AO. Assaults were carried out in Druzhba and Pivnichne, where Russian troops made advances. East and southeast of New York, Russian forces advanced into the residential area west of occupied Shiroka Balka. The map was adjusted. Ukrainian source Deep State reported an additional Russian advance in the direction of Panteleimonovka, reaching the last tree line east of the village. Russian assaults in the direction of Korenevo were repulsed. In occupied Gorlivka, the machine plant where Russian military equipment is stored and serviced was attacked by Ukraine, causing an explosion and fire. In southwestern Donetsk Oblast, in the Pokrovskaya, Russian advances continued, but at a slower pace. After an operational pause, the number of attacks on Sunday increased to 41. Assaults on the eastern edge of Vozdvizhenka and north of occupied Novoalexandrivka were unsuccessful. Fighting continued in Ivanivka, where Russian troops made additional advances. Russian assaults continued on the eastern edge of Grudivka and in the direction of Orlivka and Mykolaivka from occupied Sergeyivka. Fighting also continued in the southern part of Zhelanne, where the situation was very difficult. Pictures showed there was a large explosion in occupied Yenakieva. Russian sources did not provide any additional information. In the Kurakhove, Russian mercenary Melblogo Wagonzo claimed that, quote, "This time Nevelske has definitely been," unquote, "captured." We have trust issues, as this is the third capture claim in almost 6 months. Fighting continued near the Lozova River in Krasnogorivka and in southeastern Konstantinivka, where Russian forces advanced into the first 6 blocks of the settlement. In the Vuhledar, fighting was reported east of the T-532 highway near Vodyane, with no change in the situation. And in the Vremevka, a Russian assault in the direction of Rivnopil was unsuccessful. The International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, released 2 updates on the status of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Inspectors at the plant reported, quote, "thick dark smoke coming from the northwestern area of the plant after hearing multiple explosions throughout the evening." Rosatom alleged there was a drone attack on one of the cooling towers northwest of the main plant, causing the fire. Ukrainian officials accused Russia of starting intentional fire. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi said there was no danger to plant safety operations, and both Rosatom and the IAEA detected normal radiation levels. Grossi added, quote, "The support and assistance mission to Zaporizhzhia is requesting immediate access to the cooling tower to assess the damage." Local officials reported that the fire had been put out. On Friday, the IAEA reported that forest and brush fires were burning north of the NPP underneath the 750 and 330 kV backup line that provides external power to the plant. During an inspection of the 20 diesel generators that serve as the last line of defense to provide on-site power to the plant, the IAEA inspectors noticed that diesel fuel had been removed from some of the tanks. Russian occupiers claim that the lower levels were, quote, due to upcoming planned maintenance of the storage tanks. Did I mention that Russia is experiencing a diesel fuel and gasoline shortage? Last Sunday, Russian occupiers blocked access to the IAEA staff to start a pump that transfers water from the Zaporizhzhia thermal power plant inlet channel to the ZTPP discharge channel, quote, due to the risk of shelling. Rosatom later told the IAEA team that the pump had been turned back on. On the night of the 10th of August, the main Defense Intelligence Directorate of Ukraine attacked a gas platform in the Black Sea occupied by Russian forces with the Mahura Mach-5 Sea Baby uncrewed surface vessel, or USV. The Russians were using their platform for electronic warfare and surveillance. There was a massive explosion, and yes, there's a video. Up to 40 Russians were killed, but we can't independently verify the claim. Remember, on Friday I told you that officials in occupied Crimea claimed that all drones and USVs that attacked the port of Chernomorsk were intercepted. That Russian report was accurate, but it left out an important detail. The GUR released a video showing a Russian Project KS-701 Tunets patrol boat intercepting the Sea Baby USV with its hull and sinking. 2 other Tunets patrol boats were damaged. On Friday night, in occupied Mykolaiv Oblast, Special Operation Forces with the GUR conducted a raid on the Kinburn Spit. 6 Russian armored vehicles and other equipment were damaged and destroyed. One-way and ISR drones supported the SSO DRG, and a Ukrainian flag was raised before withdrawing. Unfortunately, during the withdrawal, one of the fast attack boats was hit, and up to 6 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.